Hello, today I'm going to be reading Chapter 9 of Takeout by Margaret Maron. When Sigrid got back to her office, she stepped out of the elevator without looking and collided with a uniformed officer, who dropped the sheaf of papers he was carrying. As they both apologized, she stopped to help him pick up the pages and saw that they were photocopied pictures of the older dead man that had been doctored to show him with open eyes. Across the top in bold black letters was, "Do you know this man?" "Detective Tildens asked me to pass these out along 10th Avenue," he explained. In the squad room, Sigurd asked Tilly, "Why 10th Avenue? Did someone recognize him?" "Not yet, but if I'm right, we could know who he is by Monday." He flourished a plastic bag. "Remember this blue rubber band from the guy's ponytail?" Sigurd didn't, but she was used to the way Tilly noticed details the rest of them often missed, and now that she looked at it more closely, she saw that white letters were printed on the band. C.J. Smith Farms, PLU 4080. What does that mean? This rubber band started life around a bunch of asparagus from a farm in New Jersey, he said happily. PLU stands for price lookup, and 4080 is the code number for asparagus. This rubber band looks new, so our victim probably acquired it fairly recently. And you know that Duan Reed receipt that was in his pocket? Sigurd nodded. It was from the store on 9th and 43rd. I called C.J. Smith Farms, and they said they sell asparagus to a market that's just around the corner. I figure that if we distribute the guy's picture within a 3-block circle around the drugstore and the market, we might get lucky." "Good thinking," Sigurd said. Albie and Lowry described how they had located the homeless man who had slept on that bench for most of the winter until Matty Mouton claimed it for himself. "His name's Lawrence Church," said Lowry, "and Mouton didn't chase him away. He left of his own accord for a halfway house over on Staten Island. Doesn't sound like there was any bad blood between them. In fact, he probably wouldn't have remembered Mouton at all, except that some old lady, probably the Orlando woman, brought Italian food down there the last night before he left for Staten Island, and Mouton said that she'd been a friend of his mother. So it looks like we've pretty much covered the block except for your friend Gottfried," said Elaine Albie. "I talked to him today," Sigurd said, looking over her notes. "He told me that one of the people who occasionally left food there was Nick Finmore, from the diner. Anybody talk to him?" Dinah Urbanska raised her hand like a schoolgirl. "That was Sam and me, Lieutenant. We spoke to him on Wednesday. He said he hadn't seen Mouton in a couple of weeks, though." She nodded at Lieutenant Hentz, who had just joined them. "What about the other one?" Sigurd asked. "We showed him the picture. He thought our guy was there Tuesday afternoon, but he couldn't be positive. Right, Sam?" "Right," said Hentz as he dropped his notepad on his desk and sat down. He remembered the ponytail. Said if it was the same man, he ordered coffee, nothing else, then took a table by the window and seemed to be waiting for someone. Who? He couldn't say. They got busy then, and next time he looked, the guy was gone. "Try the diner again," said Sigurd. "It seems to be information central for that block. Maybe someone else noticed if he left with anybody. In the meantime, did you learn anything about Mouton from the Jennings woman?" Hentz laughed. "Oh, yes, that's quite a business she's got there. As Dinah Urbanska managed to set a full mug of coffee on the corner of his desk without spilling it. He thanked her, then continued his report. Her ladies got $80 an hour for their services, or $400 for all night. There were snickers around the squad room, and Sigrid frowned. Is somebody on the take? Why hasn't she been shut down? Because she's not selling sex, Lieutenant. She's selling Cuddles. It's a Cuddles for hire place. Cuddles. Oh, I read about it. I read about that, Urbanska said. It's so sad, isn't it? Sad? asked Elaine Albee. Urbanska nodded. Imagine if you didn't have anybody in your life who would touch you or hug you. Lonely people. Ugly people. Elderly men who've lost their wives and women who don't have any relatives, or the disabled, said Hence. They pay to have someone lie down beside them and just cuddle. Hug them, stroke their arms, smooth their hair, physical human touch. Lowry looked at them in disbelief. They pay? Just get hugged? What else do they get for their $80? Asked Detective Gonzalez with a cynical leer. Nothing, Hent said flatly. Both people are fully dressed, and the clients have to sign a paper that they will not try to have sex. And there's a market for that? Asked Albie. Yep, you're right, Dinah, Albie said. That is sad. Tilly shook his head. Was that the freebie Janice Jennings gave Mouton? Hence nodded. She felt sorry for him. They keep extra clothes on hand, and if it's needed, the clients take a shower first and change into clean pajamas. She gave him a session back in the winter, but it made him so emotional that she passed him over to one of her other residents the next time she felt charitable. Residents? Asked Sigrid. All women and all currently single. They seem to range in age from late 20s to late 70s. It really is an SRO, said Hent, with a waiting list. They pay her monthly rent, and they get a single room and bath, kitchen privileges, and the use of the common rooms on the first floor. She doesn't handle their bookings, but she will take phone messages if they don't want to give out their private numbers. Besides, some of them have regular jobs. Did you speak to the other woman who did Mouton? Asked Sigrid. She knew she sounded condescending, but damned if she was going to say cuddled. She left for the weekend, he said, but she's due back on Monday. Monday it is then, said Sigrid, who was ready to call it a day. Sigrid was neither a jogger nor a yoga enthusiast, and exercise machines bored her. Nevertheless, instead of heading straight home, she yielded to the siren call of the gym she had joined several years ago because of its Olympic-sized pool. She had discovered the value of swimming back in boarding school, and now it was both workout and yoga, a way to blank her mind and give herself up to the sensual pleasures of the water. In the locker room, she changed into a one-piece white suit, then sluiced off in the shower. As soon as she entered the large tiled space with its clean, uncluttered surfaces and strong smell of chlorine, she felt herself relaxing. As usual on any afternoon, this close to quitting time for so many of Manhattan's office workers, the marked lanes were all occupied, and she waited till a space opened up in a lane that only had one swimmer. He seemed to be setting a comfortable pace, so she slid into the water several lengths behind him, stroking steadily, arm over arm. Just when she felt she could go no longer, her lungs seemed to open deeper. It was as if she had slipped into overdrive, and an out-of-body Europha took over. Now she could let surface thoughts skim across her mind, could let herself think about Newman's sketchbook and all those quick studies he'd made he'd made of her while she was unaware. She could consider loneliness and how people would pay to have someone hold them, which led inexorably to memories of Newman and how it had felt to lie in his arms and feel the steady rise and fall of his chest as he slept. He slept so quietly that more than once she had reached out in the darkness to reassure herself that he still breathed. Given their age difference, logic had warned her that she would probably outlive him by several years. At the time, though, she had pushed logic aside, and when the inevitable came so much sooner than anyone would have predicted, logic was cold comfort. You were not his first, Buntrock had told her after Newman's death, but he said you were his last. She had turned away, not wanting him to see her raw emotions. Don't, she said, but Buntrock had persisted. He did not want to be your last, Sigurd. Unthinkable then, but here in the water she could finally consider the possibility of another love, as unlikely as it still seemed. She wondered if Buntrock would know if Leland Nagy was the reason Newman had driven out into the hills above L.A., and if so, why he hadn't mentioned it. After another 20 minutes, a third swimmer entered her lane, so she cut short her cool-down period and, and was soon on her way home to the house she shared with Roman Tremirga on Hawker Street, a block or so east of the Hudson. It belonged to his godmother's sister, and when a series of circumstances forced Sigurd to find a new apartment, Roman had convinced her to give sharing his house a try. It had worked out much better than she'd hoped. In the beginning, she had fallen into the stereotypical trap and assumed that an unmarried man in his early 50s was gay. But he had never brought anyone home, and she eventually decided that while he loved gossip and social intrigue, he was one of those rare free spirits with absolutely no interest in sex. Although he had never said, she gathered that Roman possessed a modest trust fund, which he augmented by writing and selling short articles for a wide variety of small magazines. He had been enchanted to learn that Sigurd was a homicide detective and had immediately set about writing a mystery novel. To her surprise, the book actually found an editor, and he was currently working on a sequel. The thrill of being published, together with the tax write-offs for research and travel, more than compensated for the publisher's small advances. Roman could be exasperating with his adventurous approach to cooking, his magpie curiosity, his speculations as to who was doing what with whom, and his endless questions about police procedure. For the most part, though, he respected the boundaries she set, and they had settled into a comfortable relationship. He was enough older that it was rather like living with an eccentric uncle, an uncle whose eccentricities occasionally caused her to look at her cases from a different angle. Seen from the narrow street, number 42.5 could have been a run-down industrial site. The dirty gray concrete wall was too high to see anything except the upper stories of an old factory, so there was no way for casual passerby to reel that the wall concealed a single-story dwelling that had been added for the factory's foreman sometime in the 1930s. Set in that wall was a dilapidated wooden door that left flakes of green paint on Sigurd's shoes when she unlocked it. Roman had convinced her to leave it as it was. We don't want anyone thinking there's a reason to scale the wall, he'd said when she suggested a fresh coat of paint. As she stepped inside and let the door latch behind her, she found Roman deadheading some yellow flowers that had bloomed last week. Their courtyard was less than half the size of Miss Delica's garden, and it lacked both a pool and the manicured formal flower beds. But it did have some tall flowering bushes, and a white marble replica of a Greek god stood in one corner beneath a Japanese cherry tree. A nude replica. A well-endowed nude replica. Tanty Caroline thought he looked like her first husband, Roman had said. A nice man, but he came from the south of France, and he hated New York winters. As a result, whenever it snowed, Roman always felt as if he ought to throw a blanket over those bare muscular shoulders. Today, bathed in June's warm afternoon sunshine, the god had a wreath of flowers in his sculpted hair, and Sigurd thought he looked faintly embarrassed. "I've been wanting to show you something," Roman said, leading her toward the thickest bush that grew in the corner of the L where the maids' quarters that he occupied joined the larger side formed by the living room and 2 bedrooms. As he gently parted the leaves, a small brown bird shot out of the bush. "See," he said. There near the ground was a nest of twigs and grass. It held 4 speckled eggs. "I think it's a white-throated sparrow, but sparrows are so hard to identify." "Why is one of those eggs so much bigger?" asked Sigurd, who had almost no knowledge of wildlife. "I rescued it from some wretched boys who found a nest in the park and tore it down. They said it was a red bird, probably a cardinal or tanager, and being boys, they smashed the other eggs to see what was inside. I managed to talk them out of this one. It's been in the sparrow's nest for 2 days now, so I think she's accepted it. Maybe I can get an article out of it like the other one I wrote on cowbirds. They lay their eggs in other birds' nests, you know, and sometimes the baby cowbird will push out the legitimate nestlings so that—" "Is that for me?" Sigurd asked, pointing to a padded envelope on the garden table. Given a chance to lecture, Roman could run on for hours, but he never seemed to mind being interrupted. "It's from Annie," he said in his deep, sonorous bass, "addressed to both of us, so I took the liberty of opening it. Your mother is an absolute angel. She's sent us passes for Saturday." "Passes? Passes for what?" "Book Expo. Didn't she tell you?" "What's Book Expo?" "Christmas and birthdays with tons of free books for presents." Then Sigurd remembered that Annie had invited her back in March to join her at the Javits Center for the huge annual book fair that would see the launch of the book she had written about her near-death experience in Somalia. Part memoir, part coffee table book. It was illustrated by the graphic and heart-rending photos she had taken, one of which had won her a second Pulitzer. "Mac can't come that weekend," she'd said, "so why don't you? My publisher wants me to speak at a breakfast. Billy Collins is supposed to be singing after lunch, so you can score a free book and get him to autograph it. I'll get an extra pass for Roman." "Free books? A chance to meet one of her favorite poets in person? I'm in," she'd said, happily, then promptly forgot all about it. "Annie's so fortunate," Roman said now as he read the name of her publisher on their passes. A large, soft man with thinning hair, his accent was a cross between cinematic British and cultured Midwest, spoken in a deep bass voice. true class. He fitted the passes into the plastic holders that Annie had included and handed Sigurd one of the lanyards. Of course, she's a star, and I'm a mid-list nobody, but my editor brushed me off when I asked them to give me a signing time. It wouldn't have had been in the official autographing area. I would have been quite happy to sign at their booth, but they declined. Wouldn't even give me a pass. As they talked, Sigurd became aware of an appetizing smell that drifted from an open window, reminding her how long it had been since lunchtime. "Something smells good," she said, opening the door. "Only boring chicken pot pies, I'm afraid." As far as Sigurd was concerned, boring was preferable to some of Roman's more exotic leaps of culinary fantasy. Unfortunately, she was not to taste it that evening. Before Roman could take the pot pies from the oven, the phone rang and she smiled upon hearing Buntrock's voice. "I haven't had a chance to go over the Cadillac proofs yet, Elliot, but what? Marcus Livingston? No, he hasn't called. Why?" 30 minutes later, Sigurd slid into a booth in the diner across the street from Rudy Gottfried's studio. Buntrock had avoided telling her why this meeting was so urgent. "What happened, Elliot? Is the Arnheim still trying to make us pay for the extra insurance, Rudy?" The older man seemed distinctly disturbed. "I swear I don't know, Sigurd. Honest." "Didn't know what?" "That Oscar may have had a son," Buntrock said, bluntly. "What?" "He came to the gallery today while Hester and I were finalizing the picture selections." He quickly described how Vincent Haas had arrived claiming to be Newman's son, and he had this with him. He handed Sigurd a copy of the birth certificate that Haas had given Hester. She quickly scanned it, and her gray eyes were stormy, and when she turned to face Gottfried, "Is this for real, Rudy?" "Damned if I know. I was just as surprised as you when Buntrock called. But you and Newman shared that loft with her. She had Newman's baby? How could he not know? How could you not know if she was living there?" "Because she never said. The dates are right for when she and Oscar broke up and she split for California. If this birth certificate is legit, he was born about 6 months after she moved out of the loft. I helped her pack up her things, but she didn't say a word about being pregnant. Not to me, anyhow." More upset than she wanted to admit, Sigurd took a long, deep drink from the glass of water a waiter had brought her when she sat down. "Did Newman know?" "Maybe," said Buntrock, and told her about the letter from Austria that Hester had forwarded to their hotel in L.A. That could have been where he went that day. Finally, Sigurd thought, a real reason for him to drive out from L.A. alone, because surely he would have tried to question her about a child, no matter how crazy she was. "You guys ready?" asked the waiter who had brought over a basket of warm rolls. When he had taken their orders, Sigurd leaned forward. "What does Marcus say?" "He plans to backtrack on this, see if he can locate any of Oscar's relatives." "Relatives? Why?" "DNA," Buntrock said. "Unless he kept something like a hairbrush." "Only his pipe," she said sadly, "and it won't be of any use. Marcus's secretary cleaned and waxed it before she brought it to me." Miss Bales had meant well, but in preserving the wooden bowl and plastic stem, she had polished away most of the fragrant tobacco smell that had been as much a part of Newman as the turpentine and oil paints of his studio. According to Livingston, when he drew up Oscar's preliminary will, he was under the impression that there were no close relatives. Does this mean that you don't think he's Newman's son? Doesn't matter what we think, Sigrid. Livingston wants more proof than this birth certificate if Vincent Haas plans to put in a claim against Oscar's estate. Is that what he's going to do? I'm afraid so. Sigrid leaned back in the booth and took a deep breath to steady herself. I should meet him. Buntrock frowned. Do you think that's wise? Maybe not, but I need to see him for myself. Except for his white hair, he looks almost nothing like Oscar. I don't care, Elliot. If he is who he says he is, he's entitled to make a claim. To all of it, if that's what he wants. Oh, I'll imagine he'll want, Gottfried said with a cynical face. I hope you won't do anything rash until we know for sure. Don't worry, Marcus won't let me, Sigurd said, smiling for the first time. Does this man have any artistic leanings? Not that he's mentioned, said Buntrock. His parents, his adoptive parents, were lawyers, and he himself is a statistician, a bean counter. He'll be looking at the balance sheet, figuring up how much the works will bring. He won't be the first, Sigrid said quietly. As the waiters set their plates in front of them, he gave Sigurd a sheepish grin. I meant to call you, Lieutenant, but I couldn't find the card you gave me. Oh? Yeah, one of our customers. He's the locksmith down at the end of the street, across from where those bodies were. We were talking about it yesterday, and he said that he'd got called out after hours the evening before. Tuesday evening, right? When he went by the shop to get his tools, he saw an old guy with a beard sitting on the bench, and he was talking to a man with a takeout box. Did he know the man? The waiter shrugged. Said he might have seen him around the neighborhood. Didn't know his name, though. Guess I should have called you, huh? And that's the end of Chapter 9, and I will see you all tomorrow for Chapter 10. And as always, have a wonderful day.